Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. It's all darn good to see you. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Let me get that thing set up. All right. Just playing. Just being funny. Let me get to my screen. Back down some. Bam. All right, we're good. So I went ahead and went back in time and got the game Viswanathan Anand versus Wesley. So switch them. And it is taken from round 15. So you guys know they played a bunch of Blitz in the Rapid and Blitz portion of the Superbet in Poland. Yeah. Let me see if you guys are ready to go. I think we got everything covered. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have for this game. Oh, so we have e4, e5, knight comes to f3. We see knight to c6, bishop to b5. The most explosive way to play chess ever. No, I'm playing. We see knight to f6. So we do have the Berlin defense, but this is a decisive Berlin. So it's not the draws that we see sometimes. So we do have d3, just keeping everything solid, making sure we're good to go. No tactics involved, really. So we do see bishop to c5. We got bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6. We got knight to c3, knight back to d7, which might look kind of weird. But, you know, you're thinking possibly of playing f5. You don't have a pawn on the d file, so the f pawn is the only pawn that you really have to try to break down this structure a little bit. So that is the reasoning for that. So we do see a bishop to e3. Bishop takes f3, pawn takes f3, and this might look kind of strange. I'll run through two more moves. We see queen to e7 and then castles. So it might look kind of strange, like why would you develop the bishop just to give it away and then now your pawns are ugly, right? Well, you have to think in this particular case, you do get some type of, you know, compensation for what you just got done doing. You did double your pawns, but, you know, d4 is a very easy move to make in these positions. And also, you are getting a half-open file for this rook that is on f1. And, I mean, the e-pawn is actually doing a really good job of defending, you know, the central squares. And then also, it does make f5 a little bit less desirable because you're going to take back with the pawn. And then you are going to be able to push e4. And, you know, basically, you don't have any weaknesses as white. So, you actually get a lot more benefits than you do, you know, a lot more pros than you do cons in this particular case. So, we do see b6. And then we have the novelty of the game, queen over to e1. You know, you're thinking maybe if black wants to castle kingside, you know, you have queen to g3. And you are putting, you know, an immense amount of pressure on this king side. So we do see bishop to b7. We got queen over to g3. We see f6. We got a3, a5. We see knight down to d2. And I'm going to have to be 1000% honest. I'm not really 100% sure what this maneuver is doing because we see knight to d2. We got h5 and then, you know, Vichy just puts the knight back on f3. So, I mean, it kind of seems like he just wasted a couple tempi, but, I mean, he's Viswanathan Anand and I'm not, so, you know, maybe that's the reason. Maybe that's the answer. So, we do see g5. We see h4. Rook slides over to g8. We see pawn takes g5, pawn takes g5. And then we have actually reached the point in the game. This soon, yes, I know. If you do want to pause the video and see what Viswanathan Anand plays in this position, and like more so kind of what his idea is behind playing this move. It's a very positional move. Go ahead and pause the video and try to see now. Okay, cool. So I think maybe some of you guys or half of you guys might have noticed that there's a really, really juicy like hole on f5, but it doesn't really seem like you can do much at the moment. You know, it seems like maybe you can push d4 and get some trades rolling, you know, and maybe redirect the knight this way. But Anand just says, hey, man, I could do that mess immediately. So if you guess the move a knight to h4, you would be absolutely correct. The pawn is actually pinned at the moment because the rook is undefended behind it. And if that piece drops, you know, you're looking at a whole lot of different nasties going on. It's just completely 1000% losing. So you don't want to do that. So, like I said, we are trying to redirect this knight to the f5 square, and we are going to be able to do so. So after we see long castles by black, You know, this has given white, you know, the perfect opportunity, the crucial move to be able to redirect their knight up to f5. You are getting a tempo on the queen, and of course the queen can't just move wherever you want, because you are looking at knight to e7 with check. So I mean, there really isn't anywhere for the queen to go at the moment. That drops knight to e7 with check. But you know, you do have to make sure you maintain this square with the queen, because this knight to e7 fork on the king and the rook is really nasty. So we do see queen down to e6. We got b4, pawn takes b4, pawn takes b4. So as you can see, white, I mean, is doing pretty much everything that they need to do in the game. You know, they have this knight on a really beautiful square. They do kind of have these double pawns, but I mean, black doesn't really have a lot of ways to kind of move. As you guys can see, this pawn is actually doing a really good job of preventing this knight from just jumping in. So this knight isn't like ideally placed on d7, and this rook now has a completely open file. So, you know, everything is actually going really well for white at up to this point in the game. So the king slides over to b8. We see queen down to e1. We got h4. This is going to be like one of the main things that you could try to do in this position, is try to get these pawns rolling, try to open the position up, because as you can see, white only has a pawn in front of the king defending it. So if you know, kind of rip that pawn out of the way, I mean, you actually have some lines, you know, going towards the king. So you should be pretty good to go. So the queen slides over to b1. We see knight down to f6. You know, a much better square to be on. So we see queen over to a2. We see queen taking a2, rook taking a2. We got knight down to g4. You know, just adding like a little bit of an attack here. You are thinking also of like redirecting the bishop back to c8 and getting rid of that knight, and then you can just kind of hop in there and grab that pawn. So we do see rook to f3. We see rook g to f8, rook down to a1. We see bishop back to c8, like I was saying before, rook a to f1. And now you see white is just in time to be able to defend against these different threats. So the bishop does take on f5. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like the top move. I just kind of feel like, you know, white is going to be getting like pretty much all that they dream about with this move. You know, like I said, it's dead. It says it's dead even, but, you know, after the bishop takes f5, you know, you basically, you know, just kind of helped, you know, white, you know, get rid of their only weakness in the position. After the pawn takes on f5, a knight comes back to f6, and then we do see e4. And as you guys can see, I mean, white pretty much has like, you know, the ideal pawn structure compared to black structure, which is like considerably broken. So, I mean, just from a visual aspect, I feel like white, you know, positionally is doing a little bit better. So we do see g4. Rook slides over to e3. We see king down to b7. Rook e to e1. We see g3. We see rook over to a1, and of course you cannot allow, you know, white to take over the a file, so we do see rook to a8. Rook f comes to c1. We see rook over to h8. We're definitely thinking about pushing this pawn forward, and like I said, if you could try to rip open this position, you actually have a little bit of play. This knight can jump in here or even come around like this, you know, grab its own little outpost. So you know, things would be looking really great for black. So the rook takes on a8. We see rook taking a8. King sliding over to f1, rook down to a3, knight down to d1. Of course, you know, we had to move the knight because it was attacked. The rook up to a4, and Anand actually doesn't even care about that pawn. He's saying, hey, man, I want a more active king, and I'm going to redirect my pieces and get them on better squares anyway. So the king comes over to up to e2, rook takes b4, knight comes up to e3. We see c5, and then we do see rook to h1. You know, part of moving this king up was to clear, you know, for this rook to come up here. You know, there's really nothing that you can do to guard against that pawn on h4 dropping. So we do see c4, and I'm kind of curious in this position because Anand actually plays pawn takes c4, which I think is a little bit strange because knight, it just kind of seemed like was just so much better to play because it doesn't break, you know, it doesn't damage your pawn structure. And I mean, the rook would have to basically give up the exchange. But for some reason, like I said, he did take pawn here, which does drop a pawn. And then after the rook takes h4, you know, we do see the knight coming back to f6. And I guess, yeah, okay, you got to block. Yeah, you got to block at that pawn. Okay. And then after we see the knight coming back to f6, we see king to f3. The rook coming over to a4. We see rook up to h6, attacking the undefended knight. Knight goes back to d7. And then we do have king taking g3. we have a rook down to A3, and then we just simply slide the king back over to F3. And it is actually in this position that Wesley So does resign the game. And I mean, I feel like it's probably pretty apparent. I mean, you know, white is up an entire pawn, but also the more important point of the position is that they do have these connected passed pawns right here. And there isn't going to be anything that black can do. You know, this knight really doesn't have the greatest ability to try to, like, you know, block these pawns. Once this pawn comes to G4 and G5, you know, you're pretty much just going to force them home. So, you know, let's say, for example, like, I mean, the knight came back or something trying to defend, or, I mean, like I said, I mean, once you get to this point here, you know, you're not really going to be able to do anything. Even if you try to bring this rook, you know, behind, you know, you're just going to be either defending like rook to H5, or you can even push the pawn here. You know, once these pawns continue to get further and further up, they become even more and more dangerous. So Wesley So, being the caliber player that he is, you know, he went ahead and said, hey, man, I'm going to go ahead and toss the towel in. And I just realized that I didn't speak any Tagalog at the beginning of the video. Wow. I will speak some now. Mabuhay to my people in the Philippines. Kamusta aking makaibigan. Meraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Magandang umaga. Magandang hapon. Hello ulit. I appreciate you guys very much. Masaya Koma Kitty Kang Muli. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. Everybody that's around the Philippines, I appreciate it very much. Anybody who is coming from India, I will say Vanakam to you. And Nandri, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and taking a look at my video. And I will see everybody next time.